Okay, I'm going to carry on with the reassembly here of the Retina 2. So I'm applying a bit of molybdenum paste to the post that the shutter release runs on, and that doesn't need to be much more than a dirty mark on there. You use this stuff very sparingly. Likewise on the shutter release components on the struts mechanism, I've cleaned all that with some naphtha on cotton buds, and it was sticky with old grease. And I'm just giving that a little wipe with a bit of molybdenum. Make sure that that's all lubricated and running smoothly. Let's get this together. So we have our return spring. Slide that onto the shaft there. I'll apply a bit of lubricant. This is synthetic grease. I'll apply to the slots at the back of the struts. And I don't do the front because at the moment, well not at the moment, because inevitably I'll end up wiping it off with my fingers. Right, so we're going to get this shaft hooked on there correctly over that post. Lower those struts into the body. Make sure the bellows is not trapped by them. That's sitting correctly there. And the struts are held in with 4 screws. That tall post screw here that also acts as a point for a spring to hook round at the top of the camera. I'm not doing that up tight at the moment. I've got to go back and put a washer in there. I just wanted to get a screw in there to hold things while I was lining things up. There are 2 washers going here between the top of the struts and the casting and the bottom of the struts and the casting, and a screw holds them in place. They can be a bit entertaining to drop into position. That should be good. And looking down through there I can see the washer and line up this hole in the struts. I'm just checking. I've got 3 black screws. One of them will probably have traces of adhesive on it and the other 2 will not. And they all look pretty much of a muchness really. These have all been through the ultrasonic cleaner, so everything's pretty clean and tidy. Just run that screw in. That's holding the washer in place there and the struts. I'll go back and put the washer in at the top now. That goes in the same position at the top. This one's a bit trickier to get to because you have the track in the top of the body that the rangefinder arm follows. And this sort of has to go behind it, that washer. There it is there. Okay, so we've got our 2 screws, 2 washers in place. 2 more screws going at the end of the body here in the film cassette chamber. They're black screws again. And see if I can get these ones lined up and started. That's that. So with 4 screws in place, now I can tighten them up. You always get all the screws in position first, then tighten them up once they're all in place. Otherwise, inevitably, you'll find that it's a fight to get the last screw in position. Well, there's their struts all back in the body, nice and secure. While I've got this open at the base of the camera, I'll put the tripod socket back on. Now in this camera, there's a little wire, coiled wire there, acts as a bit of a spring. This little slug just acts as something for your tripod screw to press against if you wind it in that far. It's a bit of an odd arrangement. I'm not sure it serves any particularly good useful purpose. Obviously seemed like a good idea at the time. Later cameras just had a blind hole in the tripod socket, achieving much the same thing. The 3 screws hold that in place, and these are often loose on cameras, probably not just Retinas. Right, I'll just fold that leather back over there, and that'll just keep it from flapping. Go back to the front of the camera. Get the focus mount into position. There's 2 little tabs here. They are intended to stop you being able to press the closing buttons on the front unless you've returned the focus to the infinity position. You have 4 screws holding this in place, and from memory they were all loose when I took the camera apart. And an interesting bit of trivia, those screws are the same size as the screws that hold the accessory shoes in place in the latter Retinas, except these are nickel plated typically, and the ones on the holding accessory shoes in place are typically chrome plated. Right, that's in place. I'll just drop that back into the body. Now we should have 4 screws that hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. And I've put them somewhere safe, which of course is never a safe thing to do. I was able to find them almost immediately. Run them in. When you have all of them in place, you can go around and tighten them. As usual, don't go mad tightening them up because they're only small screws, and if you break them you won't be pleased. Right, well there's our focus mount in place. Now here's our inner and outer helical. Now this has all been cleaned, it's running very smooth. I haven't got any lubricant at all on it at the moment. I'm just checking the fit and checking the action here to see if that moves smoothly. It certainly does. That's good. it's always possible that when you're cleaning this mount in particular, if you manage to bend one of these two posts, then nothing's going to run smoothly afterwards. So I just checked that that did move smoothly, and making sure there's no ingrained filth left in there. Okay, well, I can lubricate the focus helical and get that in place next, I think. Here's what I'm using: Helimax XP optical and instrument helicoid grease. This stuff works well. It's very soft, has consistency probably like cold cream. I don't know if they still have shit like that. Right, let's just roll that in. I just put a little bit of lubricant in about 5 patches around the outside, work that in. I'm going to run some around here where it runs in the mount, and where it runs on the posts, just put a little smear in there and there, and drop that in place. Now this, of course, I've got marked so I know which way up it goes, and that's the correct way up. 2 marks at the bottom, 1 mark at the top. That moves smoothly. And we have the retainer, which of course also needs a smear of lubricant because the outer helical is moving or revolving round on this surface. I'll just put a quick smear around there. This only goes in one position. And then there's the screws. 6 countersunk head screws hold the retainer in place. That screw head looks a little bit misshapen. I'll pop that one aside. That's better. That looks good. All of those 6 screws are in position now. I can tighten those up. That screw with a slightly misshapen head didn't want to fall neatly into the countersink. And that meant that if it was sitting up proud, inevitably that would have rubbed on the back of the focus scale ring. Here's our focus scale ring, which can go in next. And of course we've got our alignment marks. And those screws, including that slightly misshapen one, can hold this in place, because it'll make no difference for this particular task. The screws holding the focus scale ring in position don't need to be tightened up until they stop. They only need to hold that ring firmly. If you over tighten these screws, all that will happen is that you will distort the outer helical, and it will not, the focus will not move smoothly. That's good. Next, the coupling arm for the rangefinder. Two tiny screws hold this in place on the inner helical. Get both of the ones here in position, then tighten them up. And at the top we have the guide post that runs in the slot and actually pulls the arm on the rangefinder across to adjust the position of the rangefinder. This is reluctant. Pull that forward where I can see it. Oh, that arm's sitting a bit low. There's a fair bit of play in it, that'll pull up anyway. There we go. Check the action. That's good. If this coupling here is bent back, which can happen depending on what terrible things have happened, then as the focus is returned to the infinity position, this pin will be no longer on this track and it'll be round the corner slightly, and you'll find that it'll be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get the rangefinder to work correctly at both infinity and the close end of the range. This is fine in this particular camera, that looks good. Okay, so that's our focus mount all back together and tidy. I think I can put the door on the front of the camera next. First, I'm just checking that the arms are not bent out in any way, remembering that this had come adrift from the front standard when the camera arrived here. So I apply a little bit of synthetic grease to the two pins. You can afford to be a bit messy about that because I'm going to use that grease to stick my paper washers, the cartridge paper washers, in position so they stay where they're put while I'm trying to get this in place. Now hook my door in so that the pin falls into the slot at the top, stretch it down until the pin drops into the hole at the bottom, and then we've got our two pins for the door. We've got a washer here that was used as a spacer at the top. I'll slide that into position. And put the fixing screw in place, the hinge screw. And one screw at the base. Let's peel that leather back. It's not glued in there at the moment, of course, that's just stretched over. Now it's reluctant to come up. That's better. Okay, a hinge pin screw, line up the hole on the door. It's not lining up. That's better. Tighten that screw up. Check the action of the door. That's good. Nothing loose. That's working fine. At the base of the camera, I'll glue that leather back now while I've got it here. Just looking at this green stain here, it's not sure what that's from. It's not certainly not causing any problem. I won't worry about that. Let's put a wipe of grease down in that hole there. Often there's actually a paper washer or something sitting in there. That's the base of the sprocket shaft down there. I just want to make sure that glue doesn't go down there and cause me any problems. So I'll just spread a bit of glue onto this leather. And check that I've got a even coating all the way across. To the edges. That looks good. Slide that into place. Now leather typically dries up over time and shrinks, so it's very reluctant to sit down around a raised boss like that, so it's worth taking a bit of effort to make sure it's pushed down home. There's our leather back in position. The front back on the camera, focus mount all done. I can turn my attention to the rewind up here and then the film advance. Okay, let's get this film advance mechanism together. Now, I decided that this spool was possibly original. I've compared it with another type 014 that I have here, but this is a later production, and so it's quite possible that they had moved to using that thermoplastic spool as used in the later cameras by that stage. The earlier cameras certainly had a Bakelite type plastic. So just taking this film advance shaft, get this round in the right position, get that engaged with the top of the spool, and get the 3 screws in position. I'll have to make it my business to hunt out another type 014 as late as this one and see if that had the plastic take-up spool. It certainly appears to work, fits the slot in the body nicely. I've got no reason to believe that there's a problem there, or ever was. It may well have been original equipment. The thing that caught my attention with this, of course, is we've got this this raised knurl on the bottom of the spool here to help you roll it with your thumb when you're loading the film, and the Bakelite ones don't have that. Okay, well that's in place. I want to do this rewind next, I suppose. I think I promised I was going to do that first, but well, these things happen. Right, so this. Apply a little bit of grease to this. This is the inner, and it's got a little detent spring around it, which is not always easy to get seated correctly, that's fine. Now there's a slot in the shaft, and that little screw, that special screw with the end on it, like a dog point screw I suppose, drops into that slot, and it's a stop. It stops the inner from being able to pull right out. I'll just put some lubricant on the bush. Now the bush, this lubricant is just the synthetic grease I'm using in most places. Make sure I've got that the right way up. And I'll hold back the tab on that bush, lift that slightly so it'll push over the top of the shaft. Just check that moves smoothly. That's great. And that can go on the body. Right, that part's done. Now I can continue on with all the control gear, if you like, on the film advance. Right, there's the gear here. I'll just give that a wipe with grease on the underside. Doesn't really matter which way up this goes because the two sprockets or two ratchet wheels point in opposite directions. You flip it, you get exactly the same result. Now I've got two posts and two screws, two springs. Now these springs look they look very similar, but they're not. This one goes to the front. This one to the rear. Just slide that under there so it's not under tension. Get the spring in place. That's good, just making sure that those springs were sitting correctly, that they weren't trapped under the screw head. Right, assembling all this stuff. This wheel here has the gear obviously on the bottom of it. It also has a cam surface here that the mechanism tracks around, and I'm just going to wipe a bit of molybdenum paste on that cam surface so that the lever that runs on there runs smoothly. That's all I need to do. Quick wipe of synthetic grease on the inside of that. this thing seated correctly. I've got the right screw there, yeah, I think I have. Yep. Is that not the right one? Yeah, that must be it. Not here. Why is that not going in? I've done something wrong here. Let me figure out what I've done.